John Dunning and Andre Link worked as film distributors that moved into film production in 1962. They started producing softcore films in Quebec under the banner Cinepix, films like Valerie, Initiation, and Love in a Four-Letter World. These were 100% Canadian-made erotic films that came to be known as maple syrup porn. Cinepix was Canada's first commercial film studio, and Valerie grossed over $1.6 million, making it the highest-grossing Canadian film of its time. Despite the success of Valerie, the softcore films didn't do as well as the duo had hoped, so they pivoted to the almost always profitable genre, horror. At the time, Canada's film business was very small. As a way to try to kickstart their film industry, they created new tax regulations to get investors interested in putting money into Canadian cinema. This led to a wave of B-movies that later became known as Canucksploitation. There were tax perks for filming in Canada using Canadian actors and Canadian crew members. In 1975, Dunning, Link, and a young aspiring director, Ivan Reitman, produced David Cronenberg's Shivers, and in 1977 they produced his next film, Rabid. The duo continued with horror, producing films like The House by the Lake and Blackout. The genre was proving to be much more lucrative for them, although they did end up producing the 1979 coming-of-age comedy Meatballs, which went on to gross over $70 million on a budget of around $1 million. This was their biggest commercial success and a huge breakout for Canadian cinema. This success led to Reitman directing the blockbusters Stripes and Ghostbusters. Cronenberg called producers John Dunning and Andre Link Canada's Roger Corman. Meanwhile, in the US, John Carpenter's Halloween came out in 1978 and was one of the most profitable films of all time. Studios started looking into other holidays or events that they could turn into horror films. There already was the Canadian film Black Christmas in 1974, which predated Halloween, but wasn't as successful. Other studios were making holiday or event horror movies like Prom Night, New Year's Evil, and there were ads for an upcoming movie called Friday the 13th. Scrambling for holidays, Dunning and Link landed on Valentine's Day with My Bloody Valentine. Seeing the box office potential, Paramount quickly snatched up the distribution rights. Dunning and Link wanted to keep the momentum going, but all the other holidays were being taken over by other studios. Dunning and Link were brainstorming one evening, and Dunning suggested that they should do one that has something to do with a birthday. The duo hired University of Toronto English professor John Saxton to help write the story. Dunning said he saw an article about frogs being regenerated with electric pulses. They tossed some ideas around and came up with the concept of a girl having her brain regenerated with electricity, and tied it to have something to do with her birthday. Saxton took these ideas and wrote the first script. They then hired screenwriters Timothy Bond and Peter Jobin. Bond and Jobin had previously written the made-for-TV thriller She Cried Murder in 1973. They were given an outline for the story and wrote a completely new script, which they refined over numerous rewrites. It was about a girl who suffered a traumatic brain injury when she was young and went through an experimental new surgery to repair the damage. She's now older and attending the prestigious Crawford Academy, where someone is killing the most popular kids in school. All of this has something to do with Virginia's upcoming birthday. They called the script Happy Birthday to Me. Dunning and Link were discussing how they needed a popular female lead for the film. They managed to get Melissa Sue Anderson. Anderson was Mary Ingalls on the hugely successful show Little House on the Prairie. She'd been searching for movies to do that would help her to break out of her goody-goody character that she was known for. Before this, she was offered the lead in The Blue Lagoon, but turned it down because she didn't want to do nudity. She was, however, intrigued with the idea of doing a horror film. It was definitely something that went against type. She was hired to play the character of Virginia. In order to qualify for the Canadian tax breaks, they had to have a certain amount of points, meaning the more Canadian actors, crew people, and so on, the better. Since their lead was American, they had to stack the cast with more Canadians. They hired well-known Canadian character actor Glenn Ford, who had just played the part of Pa Kent in 1978's Superman, which was the highest-grossing film of that year. Ford would play Virginia's psychiatrist. Because of the Canadian tax laws, Ford had to be the highest-paid actor, even though he had relatively one of the smallest roles in the film. When Ford joined, they had yet to secure a director, and he suggested they contact English director J Lee Thompson. Thompson had been directing since the 1950s, with movies like the original Cape Fear, McKenna's Gold, and more recently, some of the Planet of the Apes sequels. He also received an Oscar nomination for directing The Guns of Navarone. The producers didn't think he'd be interested in this sort of film, but Ford told them the director was doing some thrillers and would most likely enjoy doing this. At the time, the producers were also trying to get Charles Bronson to agree to doing one of their other projects. They discovered Bronson recently did Cabo Blanco with Thompson directing, and they were signed on to do a few more films together. Bronson was represented by the same agent, so Dunning forwarded a copy of the script for Thompson to read. Much to their surprise, he agreed to do the film. Thompson had been actively looking for a horror film to direct and was excited to do this. Thompson had previously worked on dramatic horror thrillers, stemming all the way back to Alfred Hitchcock's 1939 film, Jamaica Inn, where he worked as a member of the production unit. He did some uncredited rewrites of the script, often on the spot. What drew him to Happy Birthday to Me was the characters. He said the young people stood out as vivid individual characters. The difference between a good chiller and exploitative junk is whether or not you care about the victims. The rest of the cast was filled out with mostly unknown Canadian actors and actresses. In line with the other slashers of the time, they needed someone to handle the effects and gore. They hired a very young makeup effects artist, Stephen Dupuis. Dupuis was only 18 at the time and didn't have very much experience under his belt. There are two conflicting stories here. The first was that the artist had some disagreements over the effects the director wanted, so he quit. The other was that the producers were worried that the artist wasn't experienced enough to handle the demands of the production, so they fired him. Either way, Dupuis left, and they hired effects artist Tom Berman, who'd been working in the industry since the late 1960s, on movies like The Island of Dr. Moreau and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The change came very late in pre-production, so Berman only had a few weeks to prepare before filming was to begin. It was a week or two into June of 1980, and principal photography was set to start in July. They planned to shoot the majority of the film in Montreal, with Concordia University as the location for the fictitious Crawford Academy. Filming began on July 3rd, 1980. Right away, Ford was a problem. There were rumors of his drinking on set, which led to many outbursts while filming. He'd frequently get into heated disagreements with the director, and was often hostile to the crew. One day they were filming in a Canadian suburb. A neighbor was watching the shoot, and apparently whistled at Ford's 32-year-old wife Cynthia. Ford refused to leave his limousine until the man went into his home. Dunning spoke to a local cop they had on set and asked him to speak with the gentleman. The cop talked to the guy, who then quietly went inside his house. The producer asked the cop what he said, and the cop replied, "I told him if he didn't get in the goddamn house, I was going to shoot him." With the menace gone, Ford got out of his limo to do the scenes. Later into the shoot, an assistant director called for lunch in the middle of Ford doing one of his scenes. The actor allegedly punched the AD in the face. Ford then locked himself in his limo and refused to come out. Thompson spoke to the AD and told him that Ford wasn't going to come out until he apologized. The AD refused. Thompson then told him if he didn't, it could potentially be the end of his career as an AD. So he begrudgingly apologized. Ford also said he was sorry and returned to the set. Ford's out-of-control antics attracted the attention of the tabloid papers, who were trying to reach the cast and crew for comments. The majority of them said simply, no comment, with one actor stating only that Ford was a strange man. While it's never said in the film, it takes place in the fictional town of Exeter, Massachusetts. To be able to keep the Canadian tax breaks, they had to film the vast majority of the movie in Canada. They shot mostly in Montreal, although the bridge sequence was shot in Phoenix, New York, which was the closest location that had a drawbridge they could use. The car jumping sequence was very dangerous. One of the stuntmen broke both ankles when the car slammed down on the bridge. He somehow was able to keep the car under control. The car that landed was destroyed, and they had to get another one for the next shot. For the sequence with the white car, they rigged the car on a cable with a quick release, but they couldn't get the right shot. They sank 3 cars, each one landing the wrong way. Finally, they got the 4th one to land correctly, although they included all the drops in the movie, which is why you have 3 shots of the car landing upside down, and the last one landing right side up. After all was said and done, they ended up destroying 15 cars. The director was getting too excited about filming a horror movie. He was taking buckets of fake blood and throwing it around during some of the more horrific scenes. He kept saying, "More blood! which is especially notable in the scene where the doctor gets killed. Finally, the cameraman went to Berman and asked if he could get the director to calm down. He was tossing so much blood around, it was getting all over the crew, the equipment, and even the camera lenses. After a brief chat, he was able to get the director to rein it in. With My Bloody Valentine also in production at the time, the studio, Paramount, was insisting on more violence and more gore, thinking that would appeal to the horror audience. However, all of that later came back to bite them in the ass in a story that I would love to tell in another video, but most likely won't because Paramount doesn't believe in fair use. Anyway, they were filming, but the script was still undergoing rewrites. The Happy Birthday to Me team were trying to rewrite many of the kills in the movie to make it stand out. They asked questions like, how do we cut this guy's head off differently? One of the more graphic scenes was of a brain surgery. They wanted it to be as realistic as possible, so they consulted with an actual brain surgeon from the Montreal Neurological Hospital to oversee the effect. Initially, he was just going to tell them how to do it, but he volunteered to do the surgery himself to make it look authentic. They had a fake head with a gelatin brain, and the surgeon did the procedure as close as he could to the real one. They shot the scene in the operating theater at a hospital in Montreal. As they approached the end of filming, they weren't all that happy with the reveal of the killer. In the original script, the killer ended up being Virginia, who was possessed by the spirit of her dead mother. She was killing the top 10 kids, the most popular kids in the school, using her daughter to get revenge after her death. This explained all of Virginia's blackouts, which was her mother taking control. The director was looking at the dailies and thought Melissa Sue Anderson was too likable, and the audiences wouldn't be on board with her as the killer. The producers also weren't happy with it. They felt the twist was too obvious, and while the rest of the movie worked, if they couldn't pull off the ending, it would flop. A few weeks prior, they were filming a scene with Tracy Bregman. She was accidentally smacked by an extra, and she made a face which annoyed the director and ruined the scene. Later, he was looking at the dailies, and after seeing the face she made, he thought she could make for a killer. So now they had to figure out how to work that into the film. They called the actress, who was surprised because they had already filmed her death scene for the movie. They explained that she would, in fact, be coming back as the killer. They rewrote it so that Anne was Virginia's half-sister, and she was killing all the kids while wearing a disguise, so the murders would be pinned on Virginia. They also added insert shots of Virginia being knocked out with chloroform to explain her blackouts. They shot the end using some camera tricks to make it appear there were two Virginias. Then the real Virginia would peel the face mask off of Anne to reveal who she really was. While the mask looked flimsy, it ended up sticking too well to the actress's face and tore off 2 layers of skin. The actress said it really hurt and took months before it was fully healed. Peter Jobin, one of the writers, was not happy with the new ending. He said there was no preparation or indication of it in the script, so when it was finally revealed, he felt it didn't make much sense. They were just asking the audience to go with it. Berman said the biggest challenge in the movie was the table with all the dead kids. They had to film this over the course of a few days, so the actors had to stay in their bloody appliances for hours on end. They made the best of it by walking the small town in Quebec and freaking out the locals. Filming ran through the summer of 1980, and they were now into September. The production had a surprise turn of good luck from an unlikely source: a Screen Actors Guild strike. Studios were in panic mode because while the strike was going on, they had no product to release in the coming year. Since Paramount bought the distribution rights from My Bloody Valentine, the producers presented them with Happy Birthday to Me, but they turned it down. The producers then spoke to Columbia Pictures, who were immediately interested in the film due to it being helmed by such a prominent director. The vice president of Columbia came to see the dailies and made them an offer of $3.5 million to distribute. The budget of the film was $2.25 million, so they made a profit of over $1 million before the film was even finished. My Bloody Valentine went into production after Happy Birthday to Me, but since they wanted to get it out for Valentine's Day in February, they rushed the production. My Bloody Valentine was released into theaters on February 11th, 1981. It was the victim of a very aggressive ratings board, who had them cut out large parts of the violence. Happy Birthday to Me also suffered from an overly nitpicky ratings board. When they sent Happy Birthday to Me in for a rating, it came back with an X. So some of the deaths had to be shortened or removed entirely. The film originally showed the aftermath of Bernadette's attack, but now all we see is a quick shot of her getting her throat cut. Another one was Etienne's motorcycle wheel death. It was originally much more gruesome, but in order to get an R, they trimmed it down significantly. Amelia's death had to be removed completely. She was originally hit in the head with an axe, but there was no way to cut around it without getting an X. Since they couldn't afford to plan a new death, they just had Virginia's father find her in shock towards the climax. Columbia hired a firm to do the marketing for the film, and as per the contract with the producers, they had a right to be consulted on the advertising. The producers went to Los Angeles to meet with the marketing department. They were brought in and shown the one sheet they came up with. It was an actor who wasn't in the movie getting a skewer in his mouth. Above was the words, "John will never eat shish kebab again." No one in the movie was named John. It then boasted the film would have 6 of the most bizarre murders you would ever see. Stephen will never ride a motorcycle again. The character who meets that demise was Etienne. The producers didn't like it. On top of the errors, they thought it was too sensational. The movie was more of a horror thriller, and they thought the marketing should be a little more subtle. On top of that, the kills in the movie weren't really all that bizarre, all things considered. They asked the head of marketing, "Do you have 2 or 3 others we could look at?" He simply said, "No." He then said, "Well, gentlemen, you've been consulted. Goodbye," and showed them the door. The producers said their consulting lasted about 2 minutes. Against the producers' wishes, the studio went with the shish kebab marketing. The movie hit theaters on May 15th, 1981, which was 2 weeks after Friday the 13th Part 2. It broke $9.5 million in 2 weeks, which was really good for a small Canadian horror film. Especially good when you take into consideration that the reviews for the film were mostly bad. Notorious horror-hating critics Siskel and Ebert called it their dog of the week.
This is a disgusting, needlessly gruesome film full of stabbing, slashing, brain operations, and people being skewered like shish kebabs. Seeing it is a total waste of time. It was one happy birthday party where I wanted to make the wish and blow out the projector.
Vincent Canby from the New York Times called it an expensive ripoff of Friday the 13th and complained that the reveal made no sense whatsoever. James Harwood from Variety called the film monumentally stupid. The movie did well in theaters, but made even more money on home video, which made Columbia happy. Peter Jobin has good memories of the production, and even wrote a treatment for a sequel. However, at this point, considering it's been decades since the original, a remake is far more likely. Dunning was overjoyed at how the director handled the film. The producer said he previously worked with mostly first-time directors, so it was refreshing to work with a much more experienced one. He never missed a shot and was very gentlemanly. One of the nicest experiences he ever had with a director. Melissa Sue Anderson said that after several seasons of Little House on the Prairie, it was a relief to be chased by a maniac in Happy Birthday to Me. Her character in Little House on the Prairie went blind, had miscarriages, caught scarlet fever, and many other exhausting things she had to do for the show. Running from a killer was like a vacation. The movie was not the breakout hit Anderson was hoping for, but she did get some jobs outside of the prissy characters. She was in the TV show The Equalizer, the TV movie Dark Mansions, and she did some voice work for Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and X-Men the Animated Series. Lenora Zahn became a very successful voice actress. She's done Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, X-Men the Animated Series, and the late 2000s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. She's also in one of my favorite post-apocalyptic movies, DEFCON 4, as JJ, the girl you see in my old intro. This was Tracy Bregman's first movie. After this, she went to TV, where she became a long-running soap opera actress in over 1,700 episodes of The Young and the Restless, and over 300 episodes of The Bold and the Beautiful. Whatever the reason for Stephen Dupuis leaving the production, it didn't hurt his career. He went off to work on some much larger productions, like Scanners, RoboCop, Total Recall, and 300. He also won an Oscar with Chris Walas for 1986's The Fly. Tom Berman continued doing effects in huge movies like The Mask of Zorro and TV shows like Nip Tuck. He was nominated for an Oscar for Scrooged and received numerous Primetime Emmys for his work. Dunning and Link continued producing movies like The Vindicator, Space Hunter, and the Snake Eater trilogy. In 1994, Dunning and Link were honored for their outstanding contribution to the business of filmmaking in Canada at the 14th Genie Awards. In the late 1990s, Cinepix Film Properties was renamed Lionsgate Films Incorporated by its new parent company, Lionsgate Entertainment. Cinepix founders Link and Dunning retained their positions as CEO and chairman of the newly created Lionsgate Films. Dunning left shortly after, but Link stayed on, and in 2000 he became the president of Lionsgate Entertainment, which he held until 2006. In 2007, Dunning and Link were inducted into the Canadian Film and Television Hall of Fame. In 2011, the Toronto Film Critics Association announced Dunning was going to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. Sadly, Dunning died September 19, 2011, and the award was posthumously given to his son Greg in 2012. David Cronenberg spoke fondly of John Dunning, saying, "John Dunning is the unacknowledged godfather of an entire generation of Canadian filmmakers. I still consider him my movie mentor." In 2015, at the 4th Canadian Screen Awards, they presented the first John Dunning Discovery Award, an award given to honor outstanding low-budget independent films. In 2018, the award became the John Dunning Best First Feature Award. Happy Birthday to Me is a very underappreciated horror film. It often gets labeled as a slasher, largely due to the over-the-top marketing. However, it definitely falls more as a horror thriller, with a very slow-burn story about a young girl who's being manipulated without her knowledge. While it does have the gore and the body count of similar slashers, this one just feels different. The longer runtime helps to give the film time to breathe, so we get to know the characters more before they're killed off. Although I will admit, it could have been trimmed a little. The church bell scene could have been removed completely, and it wouldn't have changed anything. Critics bashed the directing in the film, which I found odd, because I thought Thompson's directing elevated the film and helped it to stand out from the flood of horror films from the early 80s. Also, whether it was intentional or not, it's more similar to Italian giallo films than American slasher films. The movie has its fans, although it seems they're split over the ending. Some love it, and some hate it. I love it because it was completely unexpected. Sure, it's a little ridiculous, but then you could say that about most horror films from that era. They did add in things to explain how she got away with it, with little comments like Anne saying Steve was too stoned to notice that she was wearing a mask, which I thought was a nice touch.
He was so stoned, he didn't even notice for a moment it wasn't you.
Happy Birthday to Me is a quality horror film that definitely deserves more love. It just got lumped in with the numerous other horror films from the time. Again, stemming from the marketing. Yes, its origins were exploitation, but that doesn't mean the end result can't be a good movie, especially when you factor the talent that went into the production. While there's a lot of larger, better-known event or holiday-themed horror films, this one is far too overlooked and deserves way more attention than it gets.
What's so funny?